So let's be clear. This genocide continues, this death machine keeps going because the ruling class, that includes our elected officials, our own government, and the billionaire elite, they all work together to keep it going, to keep this genocide as it is.
Salam, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Popular Cradle. I am Rhiannon. I'm joined today by two organizers, two football experts, football yappers, who are going to talk to us today about the World Cup, the Arab region and the Arab masses, how the World Cup applies, a little political history about FIFA and the World Cup, and especially we are going to talk about what the World Cup and FIFA have to do with Palestine. So I want to bring on our guests and jump into this conversation. I'm joined today first by Qasim. Hi, Qasim.
Hi, Rhiannon. Thank you for having me.
Of course. And we also have Ziad with us. Hey, Ziad, how's it going?
Hey, Rhiannon. Thank you for having me as well. I'm doing good.
All right, guys, I don't want to keep us from this convo. We're here today, actually this afternoon, as we're recording, the Argentina-England game is going to start. So we'll see who is going to be in the final match. Spain already going to the final, we know. Let's start. Who are you guys rooting for? These teams that are left, the options that we have.
How about you, Ziad? Do you want to start?
Spain, no doubt.
And Qasim?
I agree. I think pretty easy answer at this point. Spain.
Yeah, I think it's across the board, right? We're all also across the board in agreement hating on Argentina, right? They're the most evil team left.
100%.
Yeah,
I agree. Even though the British have a deep colonial past, I think it's only just and right that Argentina do not make it to the final.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of conversation about how can you be so hated that actually a global majority is rooting for England against you, and it's Argentina. Argentina walks on the pitch, and all of a sudden we're like, the Falkland Islands, that should go to England, actually.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyways, so we're already alluding to some of this stuff, FIFA, this, world football institution, extremely powerful, but also one of the least accountable international sporting institutions on earth. This is an institution that is bigger than the United Nations. 211 member countries make up FIFA. FIFA makes billions of dollars a year. It pays almost no taxes to anybody. And you hear about these dark truths, the dark underbelly of this institution, allegations of corruption, of course, but FIFA has a deeply political history, and it's more than just, this kind of neutral body that lays out the rules for international football, definitely. So maybe let's talk about it from our region, the Arab region. More Arab nations in this 2026 World Cup than ever in history. What do we think about what's happened in the tournament so far? And how are Arab masses talking about this right now?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, the tournament Egypt played was very surprising, even, to myself. I know Egypt has a history of winning the African Cup a lot, or performing really well in the African Cup, but their performances this World Cup was very impressive. I personally think they were robbed, and I think the Arab masses agree with me.
Yeah.
But yeah, Egypt played a really impressive tournament. Morocco fell short the same place they fell short last time as well. Against France, again, the same score. But I think the important part is that this time, I think we're all used to the World Cup being dominated by European teams. And I think this time seeing a lot of African and Latin American teams make their way to the later stages, and as well seeing Egypt and Morocco make it that far is very impressive and, inspiring for our people. I think generally speaking, the Tunisian performance was a bit,
lackluster. It leaves something to be wanted, Yani.
Yeah. And I think everyone was pretty surprised that they fired their coach on the first day, which is not a recipe for success.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to go back to Egypt because I think the Egyptian performance in the tournament, like you said, Ziad, has been inspiring, galvanizing across the Arab world. I mean, across the world, I think. I think a lot of people feel that Egypt was robbed in that game against Argentina.
الحكم نو فير ريفري نو فير ظلم مبين وواضح.
I think what you have is sort of like a historic, a criticism of FIFA and officiating at the World Cup that comes up a lot over the course of history, allegations of favoritism, this kind of thing, which we can totally get into. But actually what I want to talk about with Egypt is, you know, what we're talking about over the course of this episode is that FIFA, these are actually political actors. There's a history of important politics here. And what I have been thinking about since Egypt was unjustly knocked out of the tournament is the way the Egyptian coach and the Egyptian team have uplifted Palestine throughout the tournament. And even as they were knocked out, what struck you about, you know, Coach Hussam Hassan of Egypt, you know, raising the Palestinian flag, talking about Palestine in press conferences after Egyptian games during the World Cup?
Yeah, Egypt's coach, I remember, I think the last press conference he gave right before they played against Argentina, which was a round of 16. Is that right? You know, he was waving verbally, right? Like with slogans, like raising the flag of the question of Palestine right before a huge match in the World Cup, despite kind of what's happening domestically at the level of Egypt's government. To just note, like, you know, kind of building on this point, I think some of the images that are most salient for me from this World Cup, although they're heartbreaking, was watching all of the youth, you know, adults, everybody, an intergenerational crowd watching in masses amongst the rubble in Gaza, watching Egypt's games, right? And over the moon when Egypt is doing well, along with the actions of the coach and many players. I know Zico was also waving the Palestinian flag either after matches or when he had got home next to his coach. But I wanted to bring up a point here about when Egypt was unjustly eliminated. I agree with both of you. I believe it's the Egyptian government that set up the team to not land in Cairo, where you'd kind of expect, you know, a team to come home and to get a hero's return that they deserve, even though it was premature, you know, and they should have still been in the tournament by, I think, most people's standards objectively. You know, there was a decision, a very calculated decision, not to have them land in Cairo and receive that hero's return, but somewhere along a coastal city, far from any kind of, you know, major population center in Egypt, I suppose. I don't know if any of you want to comment on that and the significance there as well.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting because, you know, the coach being kind of vocally in support of Palestine, I think would have created a sort of an unfavorable situation in Egypt because being outspoken on the side of Palestine is, you know, extremely repressed. And there was actually like an incident on the pitch during the Argentina game where the coach was attacked by, or there was some sort of altercation or verbal altercation between a Zionist Argentinian fan and the Egyptian coach.
He put up the big X symbol.
Exactly.
Supposed to symbolize, if I'm not mistaken, like racial abuse.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, that was kind of ignored by FIFA and by the officials, and this entire situation around the coach being vocally pro-Palestine and bringing Palestine up in Egypt's later stage games in the World Cup, you know, I think it would have been very interesting to see how the Egyptian masses would have received this team and how they would have received the coach in a much stronger way, and I definitely think that this is not a scenario that Egypt cozies up to. You know, we saw how they've reacted to Palestine movements in the past with the March to Gaza and how they cracked down on the protesters. And unfortunately, I don't think this type of support for Palestine was properly welcomed by the Egyptian government, unsurprisingly.
I think that's right. I mean, like as we speak, right, there are people in Egypt serving prison sentences for raising the Palestinian flag. So, we more Arab countries participating in this World Cup tournament than ever in history. The Arab masses, coalescing their support, loud and outspoken for these teams. We want to see these teams go so far, but so many political contradictions are brought up also from these Arab nations participating in the World Cup, whether that's making it far or being knocked out.
Yeah, just to points that you both brought up, you know, initially, Raiden, you mentioned that there were more, I think you both mentioned this actually, there were more Arab and African nations qualifying for the World Cup. And FIFA itself for sure has stuff to gain from expanding the tournament. More games, more profit for sure. But the like lobbying efforts that went into this on on the part of the Arab world, I think specifically from the UAE and Algeria, I think were key in really pushing these lobbying efforts to get more qualifying spots before what would have been one playoff spot, not even a guaranteed spot, a spot where you'd have to play against Bolivia or Australia to potentially get a seat. Now turned to nine seats for or 8 seats for like the Arab world and 9 for Africa, something along these lines. But there were really, really strong lobbying efforts to do this. And the reason I wanted to bring this point up and kind of tie it back to what we mentioned about Egypt's coach and waving the Palestinian flag, and lifting the banner of liberation and justice for the Palestinian people is it's almost like he went against the script a little bit here, if we're taking the perspective of the Egyptian government, right? Where not only have there been strong lobbying efforts, there have been unbelievable sums of money poured into recruitment, unbelievable sums of money poured into youth academy development from a lot of these Arab countries, right? Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm sure that the Egyptian state loves to kick back and watch a football game as much as I do, but we're here to talk about the deeper reasons. And I think football, being the strongest social currency that exists in the world, we know that is the most watched event of all time, and I imagine it will be forever, has a special ability to not unite people literally, but unify people under the banner, despite what's happening locally, right? Happening domestically. The World Cup and success on the global stage, even just making it, serves as an ability for the state to be seen as legitimate, for the people to unite under the banner and kind of, again, I'm saying this word so much, but to be united, right? And this lifting of the Palestinian flag kind of contradicts some of those goals that the state would love to see. But yeah, I thought this was an important, point to kind of say why are they landing in Cairo? Why are they not landing in Cairo? Excuse me, the Egyptian team. Why were these actions kind of frowned upon? Was maybe we're doing things that the masses are not happy with. We are going to use the masses' love for this game, despite what's happening and who's at the helm of it. In this case, it's FIFA, to kind of advance our goals as a nation, right?
Yeah.
And while this is all happening, this is a project. Egypt and Israel made a deal, I think last August, to build the EMG, East Mediterranean gas pipeline with Israel to supply 35 billion worth of natural gas, if I'm not mistaken, from Israel to Palestine. This was proposed in August, and its building was just finished yesterday, a day before recording this episode. And news like this is able to kind of fall under the radar. Things that are deeply unpopular amongst the Egyptian masses, like Ziad mentioned, it's a little bit easier to fall under the radar. And as much as I love football, we're going to get into this. We have to name that it can be used as a pacifier in many ways.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's right. So many contradictions are brought to the forefront as a result of this World Cup tournament. I'm even thinking about the Moroccan state, right? Has taken steps to normalize with Israel. But of course, as an Arab region, when Morocco is playing at the World Cup and making it quite far and further than any other Arab nation, the Arab masses are behind them 100%, And it's interesting how, for example, then global majorities' disgust with Zionism also sort of gets transposed onto the Argentinian team at this time, right? Another layer of hate that Argentina is getting is around, Messi's relationship with Netanyahu and the history of that relationship, with the Zionist entity in general. So, I think we should delve into the political history of the World Cup, where we're seeing these things pop up, and it looks like geopolitics is layered over this tournament at all times. The World Cup happens always in a context of geopolitics happening all the time. So, Qasim, tell us a little bit about this political history of the World Cup.
Absolutely. Like you mentioned, Rhiannon, this is something that's been around since, the World Cup's inception. And we can take it all the way back to 1934 under Mussolini's Italy, where they're hosting the second ever World Cup. Mussolini is, of course, fascist Italy. To be really, really explicit about, what we're talking about.
If you haven't heard of him.
Yeah, literally, if you haven't heard about him. This is the second ever World Cup. It's held, in Mussolini's fascist Italy. And this becomes a chance, once the Italian state wins the bid to host the 1934 World Cup, this becomes a chance to project fascist Italy as modern, as efficient, powerful, gaining international legitimacy, which is a thread that we already kind of talked about, with more Arab representation, even in this investment in the game, promoting Italian nationalism and unity, all of these things. This is one of the first examples that we see of sports getting to be used as a geopolitical instrument, right? As soft power to leverage the goals of the nation, or the administration running the nation, I guess I can say.
Yeah.
And, there's so many interesting facts about what happens. There's a lot of rumors. I think there are more than rumors at this point, of Mussolini reportedly telling officials that Italy has to win. It's like win or die were popularized around the 1934 World Cup. But I guess the last thing I can mention here about Italy is, this is the first time we get to see it, like we said, sports being used as a tool to build the state, right? To show domestically that actually this fascist project is good, power to the world. And we see this replicated almost immediately in the 1936 Olympics, when they're held in Germany.
And then, in fact, just to hit the point home, in 34, Italy did, in fact, win the World Cup. Lots of reporting of Mussolini paying officials during that tournament, and got what he wanted / demanded.
Being on the national stage is one thing, and to win the tournament on the national stage is another.
Yeah.
I want to take us to Argentina in 78. And, Rhiannon, you open up this podcast by saying we are organizers as well as football yappers. And this one, we're going to do a little bit of yapping here, but Argentina right now is under the knife a little bit, under the microscope, whatever you want to call it, with corruption scandals that we can talk a little bit about later. Match winnings from the last World Cup being sent through FIFA as an intermediary to companies. But this history goes way back. So Argentina hosted the 1978 World Cup. And just 2 years prior to them hosting the World Cup, there was a right-wing, fascist military junta, or coup, that took power in a sort of a kind of, I don't want to call it total political vacuum, but the head of state was weak, and Argentina economically was not in a good place, to say the least. But this military junta takes place, and there are 3 military generals that are kind of at the helm, but there's one specifically who kind of emerges as the lead figure, and his name is General Jorge Rafael Videla. Okay. This guy's got a long history of being a delegate to Washington for intra-American defense agreements, all under the understanding that this is going to be an anti-communist formation. He's got relationships with Washington, with Kissinger. And long short is that in this political vacuum of sorts, or power vacuum, he is seen by Washington as the best guy to take power. There are leftist groups, communist groups that are aligned with Cuba. There are other right-wing groups, but he's kind of the one designated by Washington as, you're our guy.
Which tale as old as time internationally, in terms of who the U.S. is picking and choosing to be their guy across the global South, but certainly at this time in Latin America.
Absolutely. And he gets the green light. You can't tell bad, dark stains in political history without mentioning the name Henry Kissinger. He's the one who ultimately gives the green light to the junta. Junta, again, just the coup. And I'll just refer to it as junta. I'm sorry. It kind of comes up that way reflexively. But this military coup, they take power peacefully, if you can use those terms, but very quickly this becomes, the most repressive ruling power that's ever been seen in Argentina, and they lead what's called the Dirty War. Conservative estimates say 30,000 people are either killed and disappeared. So many people tortured in torture camps, concentration camps. They do away with all political parties, with political organizing, with union organizing, and with any kind of cultural production that does not benefit the goals of the state in this moment. And they take power in 76. And the World Cup is happening in 78. Now, I want to mention that they won the bid to host the World Cup 10 years prior. Okay, so 1966. I know it's a lot of dates, but they won the bid 10 years prior. Now we have a problem because our World Cup is in 2 years, and the public, the world, Argentinians domestically, and everybody abroad is like, this is bad. This is horrible. How are we going to host a sporting event here? So besides the millions, hundreds of millions of dollars they've invested already into the tournament, they don't want to lose, their return on investment. They want the legitimacy that's going to come from hosting this tournament.
Just like Italy got out of the 34 World Cup.
Exactly. And like the US gets today, and we'll get to that later. They pay $1 million to an American PR firm. I can't remember the name of the firm, but basically this firm is tasked with cleaning up their image. Cleaning up their image, and what we see on inauguration day, or the opening World Cup game, is, there's literal doves, that are part of the celebration. The slogans are all about world peace and all of this. While the main stadium in Buenos Aires is less than 2 miles away from the most notorious torture center and detention center called ESMA, was just miles away from the main stadium. So we've got this show of peace and doves, and Argentina is great and everything is okay here. We're playing football, life is good, less than 2 miles away from a torture center, the most notorious one. And we're going to talk a lot about, what this term is used as a sports washing, for instance. But I think this is a super, super notorious kind of early example of this. And the last thing I'll mention here is, now getting into the football a little bit, is that Argentina's not going to advance unless they win their game against Peru by a very large goal margin, okay? What happens? Well, they do win the World Cup, same as Italy, once again, same old song and dance, but they need to beat Peru by more than 5 goals, I think. They end up beating Peru 6-0. And, as much as I love Peru and all this, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like they're the best footballing nation, but 6-0 when you need 5 or 6 goals is a little bit fishy.
Yeah.
And
6-0 is also a huge margin in football in general.
Absolutely massive, okay? And who visited the Peruvian dressing room before the game? Of course, it's the de facto dictator Videla, who's taken power and leads the military junta. And who else, like we mentioned, none other than Mr. Henry Kissinger. So Kissinger and Videla visit the Peruvian dressing room. What happened behind those closed doors, we don't know. Argentina gets the goal margin they need to advance to the knockouts. And, sometime later, they win the whole tournament.
The rest is history.
Yeah, Qasim, you mentioned sports washing. This, like bringing it back closer to today. This made me think about Qatar, the 2022 World Cup, which also had corruption allegations against Argentina, but essentially it was a very important mean, I guess, to kind of wash Qatar's image and kind of reinforce this push in the Gulf states in general of like this postmodern area that attracts investments, and it's not like the rest of our Arab countries. They're not it's not the third world state, and it's developed. And it 6 or 7 penalties that Argentina got in that World Cup. Correct me if I'm wrong.
It's a common theme. It's a common theme.
Yeah,
Lionel Messi has taken, if I'm not mistaken, 9 penalties in the last 2 World Cups, in Qatar and here.
I'm just saying.
You're absolutely right. No, you're right. His 9 penalties are more than Brazil, Portugal, Germany, and one other country combined. Their team's cumulative total of penalties taken in the last 2 World Cups, Messi's taken more than 4 teams, 4 nations.
And the irony, of course, another layer of irony, that Messi sucks at taking penalty kicks and actually cannot capitalize on those 9 opportunities that he's been given.
Just saying that if Ronaldo would have been given those 9 penalties,
it's a different story. It's a different story.
What about Brazil, guys? Come on, let's give the penalties to Brazil. Ziad, I like this. It's really important that we talk about Qatar. And just a few points here. In the lead up to the World Cup, so when Qatar won the bid to win the World Cup, there was basically a system or a sponsorship agreement where FIFA and whoever the kind of employer is, I guess I'll say, for these migrant workers that are going to come in and build stadiums, roads, etc., are in charge of housing, which was very horrible housing, in charge of employment, and in charge of the migrant workers' documents. In charge of their passports. They actually held on to them. And these workers from Malaysia, from Indonesia, from the Philippines, from India, had to pay $1,000 to $3,000 in a recruitment fee to get the job. So they start by trapping you in a hole, right, in debt. And what ended up happening is some of these workers went months without payment, unable to leave the country if they had or wanted to because their employer is holding their documents. And the conditions were so horrible, in the kind of lead up and build up to this World Cup that an independent journalist, did some reporting in Malaysia and Indonesia and one other country, and they came up with a figure that was 6,500 deaths of migrant workers. And initially, FIFA totally denies this. And then, they kind of walk back and say it was less than 100 and then maybe 400 total, way, way, way later from a Qatari official, I think. But 6,500 deaths.
Yes. And meanwhile, in the lead up to the World Cup in Qatar, as there are these questions mounting about migrant workers, labor abuses, like you're talking about, Qasim, the head of FIFA, Giovanni Infantino, he has this press conference where he goes on this bizarre rant, now quite infamous rant, where he says he identifies with all these marginalized people. Today I feel African, he says. Today I feel disabled. Today I feel migrant worker.
Today I feel Qatari. Today I feel Arab. Today I feel African. Today I feel gay. Today I feel disabled. Today I feel a migrant worker.
And essentially he's doing this crazy rhetorical acrobatic act where he's saying, these criticisms of FIFA and Qatar, I guess they're like akin to discrimination faced by these marginalized groups, and that Infantino is like uplifting them. And I suppose everybody should be grateful. And I think what it comes down to in this rant, what he's saying actually is everyone needs to cut it out with the criticisms.
Yeah, and this is just kind of one example we can use to highlight that FIFA is also accountable to nobody. We talked about what this organization is. It's an NGO based out of Zurich, Switzerland, who is literally accountable to nobody and has the same legal status as a neighborhood book club. Their financial stuff is really opaque. A lot of people don't pay taxes. And when things go wrong, they're accountable to nobody but public pressure. But when you have functional hegemonic control over the strongest social currency in the world, which is football, it's really hard for even public pressure to be enough to move the needle, the world's game. We talked a lot about that.
And you have Infantino today regarding many criticisms about how this World Cup has played out, about how it's been handled, telling people, responding to that public pressure with relax, like shut up, essentially, everything is fine. The beautiful game, you be quiet and enjoy it.
38 countries, if I'm not mistaken, denied visas. We know that the Iranian team had to fly back to Tijuana, thanks to the good graces, at least, of the Mexican government allowing them to stay there. But this posed a huge, huge strain physically on the players after a game and before a game to have to fly. It was a Somali referee who was the CAF, the Confederation of African Football. He was the referee of the year. And he was going to be the first Somali referee ever to be in a World Cup, visa denied. Plenty of members of the Iraqi team were detained and other staff members. I think the videographer was denied entry. And this goes on and on and on, right? All these denials of entry. And Rhiannon, you mentioned that Infantino's literal response is chill, relax. And I was personally curious, has this always been the case? We know that FIFA's accountable to nobody. And, there's horrible examples. We talked about Mussolini's Italy, about Videla's Argentina. But have they ever taken not a principled stance, but a neutral stance, which is, in my opinion, just good enough? It's what's in their statutes and their, legal code and their charter. They're a neutral organization. And in 1966, England is going to host the World Cup, and we're coming off of the Korean War, just 13 years after its quote end, which we know it didn't end. England, is one of the members of the US-led kind of UN forces supporting the South Koreans. And on the side of North Korea, you had support from the Soviet Union, from China. England wants to deny visas for North Koreans. The North Korean team qualified for the World Cup, and England says, we don't want to give you visas. Kind of similar to what we're seeing today. Okay, so what does FIFA do? FIFA tells England, you must respect the sanctity of this game. This is non-political, blah, 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 whatever they must have said. And ultimately, the English FA, the Football Federation, pressures the English government to allow the North Koreans to enter. And they said, any country that's qualified, you must not deny their visa, or we will take this tournament and host it in another country. That's a big threat, for a country's legitimacy, especially in the time of the Cold War, where England is no longer the world's hegemon, right? Like, this is empire in decline after World War II. We can't undersell how important it is, that international legitimacy that you gain from hosting a World Cup. We can't undersell it. And honestly, the end of the story is actually quite beautiful. The North Koreans come. They beat Italy 1-0. Famous header, famous photo. They make it, I think, further than they ever have in the tournament, going to the quarterfinals, and they're housed in a working class town in England called Middlesbrough. And the locals in Middlesbrough, this working class town, kind of adopt the North Korean team as their own and cheer them on. Nice cherry on top, I suppose. Sweet ending to a crazy story.
Yeah, it's kind of an incredible story. When you look into this history, there are really important political moments in every World Cup, multiple, if not multiple, in every single World Cup. So what does all of this actually have to do, or how does it relate to Palestine right now? We've talked, and I think alluded to at least, that FIFA is a sort of non-state actor in geopolitics, at least in bringing up certain tensions or contradictions or issues to the forefront, a global majority watching these World Cup tournaments, and the heads of FIFA and the institution itself being accountable to nobody, and so able to flex massive power while at the same time operating with little to no accountability at all. So if we're still talking about today and bringing our story, of course, back to Palestine, Ziad, I know you've done a lot of research on this. Tell us about Infantino, the head of FIFA, and Gaza right now, and the Board of Peace.
So I would even go further to say that FIFA is actually an institution under the Board of Peace. Why am I saying this? The Board of Peace was created by Donald Trump around the last ceasefire in Gaza in 2025, where essentially we saw Trump try to isolate the UN and these liberal world order states and institutions by creating an alternative institution, world institution, that basically he controls and runs like a corporation.
Yeah.
And that's called the Board of Peace. And amongst the people that sit on this Board of Peace, the individuals, we have statesmen, we have financiers, and we have Trump's administration. And all of them obviously are Zionist and collaborate at a high level with Israel, if not are key architects of the Zionist project. And so if I might be missing a few, but we had Trump as the permanent head of the Board of Peace. When asked if it's even after he's president, he said it's for life, theoretically. There's Jared Kushner, Steve Witkoff, who are in the Trump administration and are also responsible for negotiating with like all foreign policy issues for Gaza, for Lebanon, for Iran, but also for Russia. And we have Tony Blair. We have AJ Banga, who's the head of the World Bank, if I'm not mistaken. And as non-executive members, but founding members nonetheless, there's an Israeli real estate developer, Benjamin Netanyahu, and Javier Milei, right? The fascist president of Argentina.
Argentina again.
Yes.
Yeah. So this group of financiers and statesmen, basically, they've taken the helm of global laws, or like international laws, and being able to determine, what peace constitutes of, or how to deal with, for instance, how to deal with the Gaza genocide, and try to, basically, essentially, what this is trying to give Israel a political victory or political achievements, which they've not been able to get in the past 3 years. And around that time, Infantino awarded Trump the FIFA Peace Prize, I think it was called. Which was created, it never existed before, and it was created essentially because Trump made this Board of Peace and kind of helping Trump frame this initiative as an actual process that is suitable.
Yeah, it legitimizes the entire thing. Yeah.
Exactly. Instead of highlighting that the Board of Peace is just a continuation of the genocide, and actually we saw in the Board of Peace presentations that Jared Kushner did that their goal is essentially to turn Gaza into small concentration camps, that the Gazan population would be put into zones, that they live extremely close to industrial zones that are on the borders, just on the outskirts of Israel. So you can imagine who's benefiting from this industry. And it's making Gaza into basically a huge work camp. And so FIFA very early on, like awarding Trump this award and also pledging around $70 million to the Board of Peace project to be part of the building process of building like sports arenas and facilities in Gaza and like their ethnic cleansing, I guess, project in Gaza. You know, as you said, Qasim, like soccer or football, like we say in the Arab region, is the number one sport on earth and maybe the number one thing on earth. And having FIFA like stand behind the Board of Peace, basically on the side of Israel and the US, is a huge push from the enemy, from the Israelis, the Zionist Americans, in trying to normalize, you know, their genocide and their occupation of Gaza. Like FIFA is a key tool in their project in the Board of Peace.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is FIFA's complicity in and support of the Board of Peace. Where does Argentina come in? So Argentina, you know, is a founding member of the Board of Peace, actually, and Javier Milei is a non-executive member. He's one of the only non-executive members that sit on the board, him and Netanyahu alike. And here we have, you know, questions come up, you know, like this is just to get, I guess, people thinking, you know, if FIFA is pledging money to the Board of Peace that Argentina is a founding member of, and Javier Milei is on the executive board, there's a conflict of interest. Very obviously, there's a question around corruption, right? And actually, there was a complaint filed by the Norwegian football team to the Olympic Committee, I think it's called.
Yeah, the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, international governing body for sports.
Exactly. They sent a complaint around Infantino and FIFA's involvement in the Board of Peace, and basically saying that like this is acting in the political interest of the US and of Israel, which violates the laws of the IOC, right? And you know, there's also allegations that FIFA's headquarters in the Trump Tower is a form of payment to Trump. And so there's all of these allegations that come up on the Board of Peace being a way to extract and funnel money, being a way to push this kind of ruling class's financial projects. And Argentina is sitting there, right? And FIFA is part of a plan that Argentina is an executive partner in. And so just like, you know, Trump intervened on the Balogun's red card to get it stripped, there's a question there on, you know, these corruption allegations around Argentina in the past few games. Like, did Trump intervene? Did the Board of Peace intervene? Is there some sort of, you know, push from Trump's side to absolve Argentina of certain whatever fouls or cards, or are we giving Argentina more penalties or so there's definitely questions there.
Just on this point, there was I'm really happy you brought up the Trump calling red card overturned for the US. And I think just yesterday, a little report came out, it might be from the Times, I can't remember who, that said there's like an ethics and rules committee in FIFA that's responsible for, okay, an appeal came, who deals with it? What's usual and customary is that 3 people on that 27-person committee would handle something like this. One member acted unilaterally, is what the report says, and he was an Emirati member of the board. And not even to overturn the red card, to say, yeah, you're going to serve the suspension just later. Not you know, in the knockout stages, you're going to do it later.
But like, how can you not have questions? How can you not have questions looking at this as just a regular person? This is how the procedures, this is how the tournament is proceeding. And then you learn, you know, FIFA is paying rent at Trump Tower in New York for an empty office space, for an empty room, you know, like how all of these things stacked up. It's like, how do you not have questions?
And what did Trump say after the Balogun in that same press conference he did, talking about the Balogun red card? He said, well, imagine if Messi got a red card, that would not be cool, right? And
that would get overturned. There would be a call made about that, right?
I think the referee is just not allowed to give the card in the first place.
Yeah, that's right.
I think sometimes this gets brought up in the debate between Messi and Ronaldo a lot. Putting the debate between Messi and Ronaldo aside, Messi has clearly a long history of going to Israel, meeting Netanyahu, playing, you know, on the pitch with, I think it was Shimon Peres. And like, these are all Israel's attempts and pushes to normalize itself in the minds of the people of the world, right? Mm-hmm. Hegemony is not just, you know, military power, right? It's basically even cultural and ideological interventions. And being able to intervene and bring in someone like Messi who is widely seen as the top 2 best players of all time. And, going to the FC Barcelona stadium or bringing FC Barcelona to Israel is definitely a push that, benefits Zionism and it benefits the enemy in general. And Messi is a key player in this.
Yes.
Messi's, ultimately that's what they want. They want Messi, who is, a household name in the world, to be associated and supportive of Israel. And that's what's been happening for at least a decade now. And now we see Messi as well, like awarding Trump. I think they met for something to do with the Inter Miami, Messi's team in the MLS. He also met with Trump in the White House, and these are all ways to kind of break the bad PR Trump has and associate a player like Messi to supporting the Trump administration or at least being okay with it. And so I think without diving into the debate between Ronaldo and Messi, I think Messi is definitely complicit, and Argentina is definitely complicit in, at least in corruption on the side of the Zionist project and helping them, normalize, especially in this moment after the genocide or during the genocide where the people of the world kind of have this kind of awakening around Israel, and they're not able to get any diplomatic support, any political victories. And it's essential that we hold everyone accountable, and we can't absolve even the best players that play a beautiful game from their complicity in the killing of our people in Gaza. I'm sure more like these scandals are going to keep coming up depending on what happens or what has happened now in the England-Argentina game.
Did you guys know that Infantino actually, just to add a couple more, about the complicity and using cultural productions as a tool of soft power to reach hegemony? FIFA goes back. Infantino was at he was late to some kind of match or FIFA event because he was at the inauguration, the signing of the Abraham Accords in 2018. He's met with Trump more times this year than any world leader. In 2021, he was at some conference hosted by the Jerusalem Post, and of course, he was at the signing earlier this year of the Board of Peace inauguration. But I just want to emphasize the points that Ziad made, because it's so key. Like, we have, cultural interventions to build hegemony through FIFA's involvement or being an institution of the Board of Peace. I actually really like how you phrased that, Ziad. I'm going to steal that for the future.
That was a bar.
It was such a bar. So you've got that piece. You've got trying to entrench or integrate or manipulate Gaza into being, a neoliberal development model, foreign investments, public-private partnerships, all of the things you had mentioned. And I was just thinking about this, when I sit back and think about FIFA's involvement, all of the detractors of the Board of Peace and of FIFA are calling FIFA the mascot of the Board of Peace, kind of as a slight to Infantino. But, for me, it's like when you sit back, you think about it, and just like we saw in Italy and with Mussolini, especially in Argentina, if FIFA and football advance an agenda, then it's real, then it's right, then it's not about politics. We can kind of accept this post-war order, right? And just kind of taking it a little bit further, you also pulled on this thread, Zia, that like because of Israel's pariah status now, and even the US largely, the awakening of so much youth and users on social media since the genocide in Gaza, right? I think Israel and the US need FIFA to take these Board of Peace plans from, I know they're contractual, I don't want to just kind of mislabel them as theoretical, but take them from the realm of plans to practice through stadiums, through football academies, right? That they need FIFA. But I want to pose a question to you guys now. This has worked in the past. FIFA's been deployed as a tool of empire, of hegemonic control. Do we think it's going to work this time with the heightened consciousness of youth, with Israel's pariah status, with the US's, the skepticism around US foreign policy, and now with all of the corruption around FIFA that Ziad walked us through today? Is it going to work as easily?
Yeah. Yeah. Is that enough? Like, I get, if you take it as an abstraction, disconnected from everything else, you're just somebody anywhere in the world, and you see like, oh, FIFA is going to build stadiums and develop football, youth football in Gaza, right? And if you take that abstracted from all political context and the material reality and the conditions we're talking about on the ground within FIFA, in geopolitics, and of course, specifically in Gaza right now, it's like, is that enough actually? And I think I really think about like our responsibility, which Ziad, you alluded to, our responsibility right now to make sure that the Zionist entity cannot replenish its image on the world stage. This is a very important, it's something to watch for sure, and tells us a little bit about, like you're saying, Qasim, like where the global majority is at right now and what tools the hegemon will be trying to deploy to, let's say, restabilize this project and reconsolidate some kind of public permission, let's say, for at least pieces of the project that seem to be politically neutral, if not maybe even a good idea, right?
I want to say here, Israel has been able, and the US, of course, have been able to destroy most of Gaza and hit the camps in the West Bank and south of the Litani River. You know, the villages in Lebanon are also completely decimated. They launched their brutal war on Iran. And so, you know, they've been very good at sowing death and destruction in the region for 3 years. But, you know, with these military, if you want to call them for the US and Trump's perspective, successes, they weren't able to bring out a political outcome. And what do I mean by this? When Egypt was defeated by the enemy in 1967, later on, you know, although there was a more war afterwards, but it paved the way for eventually having Camp David in 1978, which kind of solidifying in the people of the region's minds that defeating Israel was impossible, and that Israel was this almighty and encompassing power in the region, that our people are not capable of, you know, of seeking liberation. And so Camp David was a political translation of the Israeli military successes, right? And in many ways, Israel and the US have not been able to create the conditions this time for another Camp David. There is no political outcome and solution that is working. Today, this morning, we're seeing escalations between Iran and the US. We're seeing the memorandum of understanding that they signed basically fall apart. And so, you know, if we read the US and the enemy as, you know, all calculated and all like very strong, we might miss these details, but in truth, they're actually very desperate for a political and narrative victory. If there's one arena that they lost in, right, even though they achieved military successes in the region, if there's one arena they lost in, was the political arena in the globe, around the world. And, you know, that's where the diaspora comes in. You know, that's where we come in, right? There's 7 million Palestinians in the diaspora, but, you know, but we've also seen like this huge solidarity movement in North America and Europe and all across the world be actually more popular and more impactful than in the Arab region. You know, like what mass protest or movement is going on in the Arab region? There isn't one. Although like in the rest of the globe, we see weekly protests, campaigns, we see national marches, we see like electoral pushes, shutdowns, we see so many initiatives on the side of Palestine. And so this is an arena that clearly contributed to the political and narrative loss of Israel, you know, in the minds of the people of the world. And to answer your question, Qasim, is Israel going to be able to recover from this hit? And is FIFA, for instance, is whitewashing going to be successful? That's in our hands, you know, heavily in our hands. If we allow Israel to recover from this, it's our fault, because narratively, the global arena played a very important role in isolating Israel in the hearts and minds of the people around the world and preventing them from translating their military success politically. And so we need to remain this way. You know, we need to remain this way in the work we're doing and our mobilizations and our campaigns. And this push that the enemy is doing in the World Cup and in FIFA is supposed to give us clarity that, you know, this is where we need to confront the enemy. We need to confront the enemy on the political and ideological level.
Yeah. You know, we have to see that around the world, the genocide was a time of mass heightening of political consciousness. And this then extends to a heightening of political consciousness and clarity to even something like FIFA, right? Where the masses, I think, understand that through the Board of Peace, some sort of proposed plan by FIFA to quote unquote develop youth football or build stadiums in Gaza is bad faith. It is a lie on its face. To the extent any of this development or any of these stadiums are going to be built, it will be for the profit of non-Palestinians with no meaningful input from Palestinians or from people in Gaza. And so this just goes in, will likely be part of a money laundering process that we know FIFA wheels and deals in. So it's another layer, I think, of exactly what you're saying, that the veil has been lifted. The people know across the world what this Zionist project really means, really looks like, what it's about, which is death and destruction, and what this global hegemon intends to do at the United States beck and call and with the United States backing. And so what's the big takeaway? What do we take from FIFA's involvement in geopolitics, let's say, this sordid history? What does all of this mean?
It's a good question. I think, as I've gotten a little bit older, studying politics, organizing, I think this was without question the most internal tension I felt with a World Cup coming around, with all the contradictions that we've identified in this conversation, right? From the Arab world itself, from Egypt, a country that we were all behind as football heads, as people of consciousness, and kind of juxtaposing that with their government's conduct, talking about FIFA's involvement in the Board of Peace, everything that Ziad walked us through. I felt so not even conflicted, I'll be honest. I said, this is the first time I'm not going to watch, that, not knowing that, in the past that it didn't have a dark history, that it was bad. But I think the contradictions felt sharp and strong enough this time that I said, I can't. And, kind of without my consent, the game starts rolling around, the commercials roll around, the music starts to be released, the Brazilian team, who I'll out myself. That's the team I love to watch win, besides, some of the countries we've talked about. All of this started to come, within months or 2 months before the tournament, and I almost couldn't resist. I am first, a Palestinian person, an organizer fighting for, our collective liberation, all of these things, but I'm also somebody like everybody in our region who loves football. And I don't know that, I have an answer to this, kind of how to navigate this question. In an ideal world, FIFA doesn't hold, functional hegemony and total power with no accountability over the world's game. Like Ziad mentioned, maybe even the most significant thing, not just sport in the world, but thing, period. Mm-hmm. Ideal world, maybe that's the case. But today we're sadly left with this contradiction of, you have this supposed NGO, with this horrible history and horrible contemporary modern conduct today in our region, all over the world, and this game that we absolutely love. I think the love for the game will always continue. And, maybe it's our responsibility to have more discourse like this around the time of the World Cup, to really expose and elucidate some of these contradictions, to popularize them. It's absolutely our responsibility to double down on our organizing responsibilities, like Ziad mentioned, as people of conscience, not allowing Israel to recover from its pariah status, not granting them a single PR victory through, or whoever it may be, and just kind of double down on our work. But yeah, I don't have an answer. It's a really difficult thing to contend with. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if we know that Zionism is the primary contradiction in our region, and it's undeniable that FIFA plays a role too, even the beautiful game. All right, I think that's a great place to end this episode. Thank you both so much, Qasim and Ziad, for joining us on this episode.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you, Rhiannon.
We'll see everybody next time on the next episode of Popular Credo. Popular Cradle is made in partnership with the Palestinian Youth Movement. Thank you to the many people who contributed to the making of this episode. Our editor is Soraya Shockley. Our artwork is by Shenbi G and Vivek Venkatraman. Our theme music is composed by Salma Talib and performed by Clarissa Bitar and Hisham Jarmakani. Follow, like, and subscribe to us on social media at Popular Cradle. That's YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram at Popular Cradle.
Guys, Argentina's dirtiest player, he gets a red card every other week in the Premier League in England. He's gotten 0 yellow cards in so many World Cup matches, and I can't anymore. I'm also happy, Ziad, that you brought the hate for Argentina.
Yeah. They're a part of this. It can't be denied anymore, guys. The veil is lifted. The veil is lifted on Argentina too.
I'm praying on their downfall.
I know.
Praying. Imagine if Bellingham scores 2 goals, overtakes Messi as top scorer.
Yes, inshallah.
As a midfielder, wow.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so. I want this to stay in the recording and for us to not be hopefully not embarrassed because we haven't seen the end of the match yet.
Yeah.